Hey guys, what's going on? Hope you're all doing good today. Thanks for taking a few minutes to tune in to this afternoon's video. And I'm just heading back from Table Rock Lake right now. Just had that on the water fish the moment lesson today. If you guys tuned into the video I posted earlier, it was raining when I left this morning and it's still raining. So anyway, fished in the rain about half the day today. And it seems to be like the norm here in Missouri here lately. But today I wanted to give you guys the last in the truck video for a while, because tomorrow I'll start back with my tips in the tackle room. You know, maybe some stuff on the water this weekend and get out of the truck. But I've been doing these fish the moment on the water lessons, so I've had to squeeze in all my time here. You know, when I can, because I'm going to pick up Elijah now, then get back and do a little work around the house. So what I want to talk about today while I'm driving back is what it actually means about what is the transition. When you hear people talking about, oh, the bass are in transition right now, or this is a transitional time, or it's a transition area. You hear about this a lot in different type of seasons, specifically like right now what we're talking about when you're talking about getting into the late spawn, post spawn, early summer, all that transition there. And the reason I wanted to do this today is it reminds me of some stuff that happened on the water today, because we were fishing out on Table Rock Lake, and I was explaining to the guys that I was out with about, you know, this is a transition area, the bass are in transition right now, and I think a lot of people maybe get confused about that a little bit, so I wanted to have a little discussion about it. First of all, when you hear guys talk about transitions, or if you read articles about it, or if you watch YouTube videos on fish transitioning, it is not as black and white as it seems. I mean, everybody, when they talk about, you know, the fish in a transition, they talk about, okay, yeah, the bass are out on the main lake when it's cold, and as it warms up, they start moving up back into the creeks and the coves, and they start staging, getting ready to spawn, and they move back to the back of the coves and spawn, and then they transition back out to the main lake. But this is not how it is a lot of times. This is like an oversimplification of the reality of what's going on out there. When you're talking about seasonal changes and seasonal movements of bass, and you use the term transitions in it, you can't lump everything into the same picture on there, because one of the realities of bass fishing, guys, is that you're going to find out that bass are not doing the same thing at the same time all over the lake. I mean, there are so many things going on in the lake, and there's different populations of fish depending upon the part of the lake you're in. There's the populations of those fish are affected by the way that the lake lays out in a specific area. For example, if you're down on the dam area of the lake, you may have a deeper, clearer section of the lake that's going to make the bass behave in a certain way. And if you're up the river arms or in the back of a creek, you may have a lot more flat or stained water that's going to have the bass do something completely different than what the bass on the lower end of the lake are doing. So when you talk in terms of transition, you can't lump everything in together. Transitions, for the most part, take place much, much slower than what most people think about. I was trying to explain today to the guys I was fishing with about how the bass, you know, will spawn in the back of these coves, and they set up on the secondary points, transitioning into the early summer patterns. But a lot of times that's not exactly true as far as what everything's doing, because on any lake that you go to, when you're talking about the post-spawn, early summer period, you're going to have some bass that are on the main lake. You're going to have some bass that are on the secondary points in the creeks. You're going to have a few bass that are still hanging out in the back of the coves, and you're going to have bass on the banks between those secondary points and the back ends of the coves. Now, depending upon the lake that you're in, this can be more pronounced than others. A lake like Table Rock Lake, or most clear water lakes, they tend to have less dead water on them. Whereas a lake, if you have a lake like Lake Dardanelle in Arkansas that has a lot of stained water, you have a tremendous amount of dead water in it. So they're not going to use those areas as extensively as they do on clear water lakes. But for the most part, when you're talking about transitions, one of the big things you have to keep in mind is that one bass does not transition the same way another bass does, even if it's in the same area. I'll take, for example, if you pull back into a major creek arm in your favorite lake, just pick any creek arm, say the biggest creek arm in the lake that you fish, there's a big population of bass in there. And say you go back into a cove off of that main creek arm, and that cove may have a mix of cover in it. It may have boat docks, it may have shallow laydowns, it may have riprap, it may have some shallow bait grass, whatever the cover has. When you talk about fish transitioning from one part of that cove or that creek to the other, you have to remember that, like I said, you're not lumping up every bass in that creek. I mean, for whatever reason, and nobody's figured this out yet. Nobody's figured out why that one bass will be out on the main lake and another bass at the same time will be in the back of the cove. You may have, if you're fishing a lake like Lake Eufaula in Alabama, you may have a bass sitting on the top of a brush pile at 25 foot of water in late May, and then you may have another bass that's sitting in 1.5 foot of water in the back of a shallow dock in the back of the cove. So if anybody can ever figure out why that is, let me know, because I don't know anybody that knows that. I don't know why some bass behave in certain manners and others don't. The only thing that I can justify on that is that bass are like people a lot of times. Every person has a personality. I prefer, like I said, I prefer to live like out in the country if it was up to me. Other persons are more comfortable in an urban setting. It's just a matter of personal preference. And I think that's the same with the bass. I think a lot of bass just have a preference. I think a lot of them maybe get pushed into certain areas out of competition, out of a pecking order, maybe some type of a deal. But the point is don't get locked in on the term transitions, or the bass are transitioning, or transition areas. This can be an oversimplification, and when you do that, you can take yourself out of a lot of other possible patterns that are going on in a specific body of the water. I think what you need to be focused on more than like talking about transitions or transition areas is the areas that bass use under different weather conditions, because bass will feed accordingly to a variety of weather conditions and a variety of daylight, things that happen during the daylight hours. I'll use one example here as far as feeding goes that I was telling the guys today. If you have, I was fishing Table Rock Lake last summer, and I caught a bass suspended in open water in 30 foot of water over 60 feet. So this bass was out roaming around chasing shad, 8 o'clock in the morning, 30 foot down over 60 feet of water. That bass, when I caught it, it had a fresh crawdad pincher sticking out of its mouth, which means that bass was actually on the bank at some point to get a crawfish and then moved out to suspend in deeper water. So I think that, bass, and it's the same deal like if you get a day like today, if it's sunny at 10 o'clock in the morning and all of a sudden you get a shower or the wind comes in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it doesn't take anything at all for a bass to move 100 yards. A bass can swim 100 yards in, just a matter of a minute or two. So, and I think they do that a lot. I think they move a lot farther and a lot quicker than what we give them credit for. So when you're talking about bass are transitioning to an area, don't get this picture in your mind that these fish are moving at a snail's pace and they go to the back of the cove and they hang out and something happens and they move halfway back in the cove, and then the next big group moves out to the secondary points. Pay more attention to the environmental factors, the weather conditions that you're fishing under, and don't get locked in too much and think in terms of bass using transition areas or transitioning from one particular seasonal movement to another. So anyway, just wanted to go over that a little bit. It was sort of a topic that came up today. Again, thanks for tuning in to the videos, guys. Much appreciated, and we'll be back tomorrow with a good tip. See y'all.